to Unashamed Unafraid, a show unashamed about sexual addiction recovery and unafraid of coming unto Christ for healing, where we share real recovery stories, learn from experts, and share resources that actually work. So join us in being unashamed and unafraid.
Welcome to another episode of Unashamed Unafraid. We have a story and professional episode for you today.
The combo.
Yep. Yeah. Before we get to that, I just wanted to take a minute and thank you guys. I haven't been the host for very long on this podcast, but it's been a big growing experience for me. And a lot of you guys have seen me grow and make mistakes over the course of that, and I just wanted to send a heartfelt thank you to all of you guys who have listened and heard my story and just felt the pain and the joy and the healing with me. It's really special to go through that experience with all of you, and just wanted to say that and let you know that I consider you all friends. Thank you for being here at Unashamed Unafraid today. We're here with Roxy. Roxy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's been fun. We've been chatting, for the last 10 minutes just before we started this. And you're a real, you have so much energy and life. And I'm curious to get into your story because I think there's a lot behind that. So you are the author. Well, why don't you just introduce your book and tell us a little bit about you?
Okay. I recently published Forgotten in the Battle with Sexual Addiction, The Journey of a Spouse. And it was a bucket list thing. My husband, Jack, passed away 6 years ago, and after he died in recovery. And after he died, I kind of went, okay, what's left? And I had lots of grandkids to chase after and lots to do. But I thought, I started this book about 10 years ago, and the Spirit told me to put it away. I've been an author in my career for years and years, but I think I needed to grow a little bit more. I needed to lose any and all bitterness, and it was like, this is something that if I don't do, I'll regret, because I know that I lived through and learned from a very difficult experience that might help other people.
That doesn't get talked about enough.
Yes, and that is why I wrote it. There was a point where I thought, I'm just old, nobody wants to hear what I have to say. And then it was like all these stories gravitated toward me, and they were suffering in silence. And I just thought, there's no retribution to my husband, and I'm older. I have no shame about it, and I want to teach others that they don't need to have shame about it as well.
Wow. I was reading through your book a little bit earlier, and one of the things that I loved was the vulnerability and the relatability of it. There's so much wisdom in there that's captured from deep healing and personal experience. And I think not just the story part of it, but some of your insights and wisdom and the things that you've learned. I mean, you cover codependency, and you cover betrayal trauma, and you cover emotions, and you cover healing, and you cover spousal support. And I mean, there wasn't really a lot of things as I thumbed through that you didn't cover. It was, this is the whole thing. This
I took a lot of notes.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just very impressed. So,
and the other part is that we did this early, before there were words for this addiction. And we made a lot of mistakes. And when you learn by your mistakes, you learn really deeply. And I wanted to spare others some of those pitfalls.
Wow. If you're listening and you didn't catch that, we are on with Roxy Johnson, and her book is called Forgotten in the Battle of Sexual Addiction. Roxy, would you tell us your story?
You bet. So, I was 46 years old when what I call the bomb went off in my life. I had been very ill for about 7 months, like hospitalized several times ill. And at the end of that illness, my husband sat me down. We'd been married for 24 years. We had 4 children. And he vomited a list of misdeeds. And I went into shock. And he promised that nothing else would ever happen. And I mean, he talked about things I didn't understand. He talked about phone sex and strip clubs and they were things way over my head. And like I says, he said nothing else would ever happen, and I tried to believe him. Well, a week later, I noticed a behavior that I had noticed as a pattern. And the Spirit said, check his wallet. And I had never done so in our marriage, but I got his wallet, and there were motel receipts. And the next morning, I went into work, and I had some flexibility. I asked coworkers to cover for me, went to the bank, and I found a lot of heart-wrenching things through the bank records. And I asked him to meet me at a park, and I said, I don't know who you are or what you're doing, but if you don't get some help today, I will divorce you. And to his credit, within a week, he checked himself into a residential treatment center. But we both thought that it was substance related, because every time he acted out, it was accompanied by abuse of substance. But at the end of the 30-day program, his counselor sat us both down and said, I think your husband is a sex addict. And I looked at him and I said, what is that? So we were directed to LifeStar, and we also, in that residential treatment center, they go to meetings every single day, and they had been attending an SA, or Sexaholics Anonymous meeting, on one night a week. And that was the connector for my husband and his therapist, I came to find out. And he continued going to that meeting. There was also an S-Anon, or a spouse meeting, that was held in the same building, and he asked me to attend. Well, at this point, I was like, I was kind of defiant, and
as is pretty normal.
Yeah. Anyway, I tried another meeting, but it was a gripe session. And so I ended up trying this meeting because... Can
you speak to that a little bit? What do you mean by gripe session?
Oh, they just... It just spiraled. It was just like, oh, he's so awful, and he's terrible, and look at this terrible mess. And I knew enough, because I was raised in an alcoholic home, I knew enough to know that if I didn't find solutions, I would just drown in this situation that had engulfed my emotions and taken over my life. And so I tried that family meeting, and the first or second time I went, I knew there was something for me, because some of those women had hope. Mm-hmm. And both of those meetings were eventually supported by SA Lifeline, and that was the group that we built our recovery on. Now, I have to go back because that recovery was neither linear nor was it easy.
Yeah, what was that period of time like for you?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'll tell you what. It took me 3 years to say that I was committed to staying married. It took me 3 years. Mm-hmm. There was no...
That seems fair to me, though.
Yeah, because I had to learn what I was forgiving. And I encourage spouses to take their time, because you can't forgive something you don't understand what happened to you. Okay? And so, but what that looked like is, for a lot of the time, Jack wanted his marriage and his addiction. And like I said, we had been married for 24 years, so we were in some pretty destructive, codependent cycles. There was a lot of times that we both went to what I lovingly call the drama triangle of one of us being a fixer, one of us being a victim, one of us being a persecutor.
Which role did you often play?
Oh, you know what? Mostly the fixer. Yeah, mostly the fixer. But I could do all three. You know, but
that's the nature of the triangle, though.
Yeah, it is the nature, and I learned how to surrender my life over to God. There's quite a story behind that. Would you like me to tell it?
Oh, I would love that.
So, like I said, I was very ill, and it carried on for months, and about 3 months into it and like 4 hospital stays, I knelt down and said, Father in heaven, I've been promised that I would heal. How come I'm not healing? Because it just kept getting worse and worse. And I somehow knew or heard, this is for the spirituality of a family member. Are you willing to go through this? And I thought of my teenage and young adult children, and I thought, absolutely. And I was flooded by love. Flooded. Very rarely have I ever felt that much love from Heavenly Father. And 2 months later, the same situation repeated itself because I was again discouraged and couldn't understand. And it was 3 months later when I started to get well that Jack's problems came out. And when I learned, I believe in that the 4 cornerstones, if you will, lots of people call them different things, but of recovery is spirituality, education, a community, and therapy, good competent therapist. And so I dug in and learned, because that's my nature. And when I learned that that addiction is the inability to handle extreme emotions, I knew that my illness is what catapulted my husband's addiction from the secrecy of just lusting and masturbating into physical acting out. And so then I didn't feel betrayed by just my husband. I felt betrayed by God. Wow. And I always knew there was a God. But and I saw his hand in our recovery. But somehow through all of this, I pictured a God who I was okay to be collateral damage. And I figured that I was just some of the masses that he used to move his work and that there were people he loved, like my husband, who he wanted to heal. And Jack found out about this on a road trip about 2 years later, and he knew that he was part of this. He knew that my growing up years in an alcoholic home were part of it, but that he was part of that. And he, I can still see the pain in his eyes, and he asked me, he said, please, I ended our conversation with, I don't believe that God knows my name. And he said, please, will you search for the God that knows your name? And I committed to. And so I dug into that just like I had recovery. I learned and I studied and I prayed and I watched. And about 2 years later, I was given another blessing by someone that didn't know of that journey. And he ended the blessing with, you're loved and God knows your name. So the reason why I tell that story is because a lot of spouses misconstrue God from the addiction, from what they suffer in the addiction, what they might have misunderstood as a child and so forth. And so I, in my book and as I talk, I encourage people to look for the God who knows their name, because I believe that that's part of recovery and healing.
Absolutely. We do too.
I know that from listening to you guys, yeah.
Can I ask a question? So I'm going to back up. You said something that I think has potential to hit some spouses wrong. When you said you felt like some of your behaviors may have catapulted some of your husband's behaviors.
Well, the illness did, but yes, we did circles. Yes, I love. Keep going with your question because I think I know where you're going. I'm like, I think some of the, damage that's been done around the codependent term. Yes.
With the spouses is that, if I was different, or like it's almost this I caused my husband or my spouse's addiction because I wasn't healthy enough or boundaried enough or blah blah blah.
Right. Can I speak to that?
Yes. Can we? I just want to make sure that gets clear.
So I came into those meetings like I saw a lot of other spouses come in with, this is his problem. Why am I here?
Yeah.
Then through a little bit of time, then I bought into those nagging voices, and sometimes the input you get from family, clergy, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
You caused this. Or inferring that I caused it.
Yeah. And
I had to learn firsthand that I didn't cause it and I couldn't cure it.
I love that you're bringing this up, because that's something you brought up in your book a little bit about how some of the language that's used culturally can inflame that nerve a little bit. Can you speak to that? Because I just loved that. I was reading through that and I was like, wow, this is gold.
Well, I tried to tell some family members, and the responses were on either side of a broad range.
Yeah.
And at work, I was told not to talk about it. And clergy was like, why are you staying? And they would see me coming down the hall and turn around and go the other way, and I'm not kidding. But my dad explained that one time. He said, they don't know what to do with you. You need to tell them what you need.
Yeah.
And that's a part in the book
Yeah.
that started with things I wish I had known, because in that moment I realized I didn't know what I needed. But I tell in the book that if something, I had relatives say I was a terrible wife, that I must not have sex enough, or that...
they really said that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And that my demeanor caused it. And I had people say, oh, this is just a bump in the road and you'll get over it. None of that validates a spouse's heart that has just been shattered.
Yeah.
And looking back, betrayal trauma is something that you don't understand yourself. And there wasn't even that term. But I remember sitting in a meeting thinking, I'm not myself. I don't act like myself. What's happening to me? And I think that's very, very common. And it's almost like the betrayed spouse has to circle around and have the safety from a community, to circle around from going to, I am crazy, what is wrong with me, back to, no, I am okay, something has happened with my life, I'm getting a foundation under me, and I can decide how to move forward.
And that journey can take a minute. A
You
long minute for some folks, right?
So I shared that it took me 3 years to commit to stay in the marriage. Those 3 years included several serious relapses. They included a boundary where I filled out divorce papers. I did not file them, but Jack was far enough in recovery that I could set that bottom line. That's an interesting story because, anyway, and it also included him trying to harm himself. I mean, if you're a spouse and you've lived through any of that, the one thing that I would say is give yourself grace. That isn't to say that Jack wasn't suffering just as much as I was. And that's what recovery did for me, is it helped me to see his humanness in this as well. Yeah. But back to why I went to my timeline, is it honestly took me 5 years to completely forgive him. And he was very good about that, taking that much time. By that point, he was in enough recovery that he could accept that I had to process it, and that I was working recovery, and I would come out on top.
What did he do during that time that made you feel safe enough to work through the process?
The biggest thing that Jack did, the biggest change, I put it in terms of someone who's working recovery is going to be humble, honest, and accountable. And I would add something else. The most beautiful part is that I knew that Jack was working recovery when he saw me, when he saw Roxy, when he allowed me to have my emotions. And I don't mean allowed me in that I could have my emotions whether or not he allowed it. But when he accepted my emotions. So
without trying to tell you that you should feel a different way, or
exactly,
or defend his position, or
And the irony is that at the same time, it allowed me to do the same for him.
Yeah.
So as I've shared, I lost Jack to heart disease, and hospitals were terrible triggers for both of us. They call addiction a drug of choice. So the person who struggles with addiction can have several addictions, so to speak, or dispositions to misuse several things. And Jack was no different in that. And he was touched continually by nurses. And the last 3 years of his life were spent in and out of the hospital, sometimes literally living there. And he never quit seeing me that whole time. There were times we had very tough conversations where I might say, you misused that prescription. And, you know, I'll never forget that there were days when he was angry and we had to talk about it later, and we had both learned that skill. But there were also days when he said, you're right. I will work on that. And he did.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's the beauty of recovery. That's why it took me so long to commit, is because recovery gave me the tools to know what a really good marriage could look like.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to settle for a mediocre marriage at that point. I wanted a good one. And it was quite a blessing that Jack and I were able to develop a really firm, bonded companionship.
Can I ask a complimentary question to what Sam just said? Sam asked you, like, what was something that Jack did that really cultivated some safety for you? What did you do for you that really cultivated safety for you?
You know, that's a really good question, because I would say that was probably the hardest part of recovery for me. I have a section that's just titled, You Get to Find Yourself. And the first place I start out is with preferences. And we were so mired that I lost the ability to have preferences about what colors I liked, how I wanted my house decorated, what foods I liked. And through recovery and through dailies and through taking time for myself, I learned and rediscovered myself. And for anyone watching, for a spouse that's watching, that's a part of recovery, is jumping in and saying, who am I and who do I want to be? So one of the funny stories, and one of the things I suggest, is to get a hobby and get something you're passionate about. And I grew up on motorcycles. And when this happened, Jack had told me no about a motorcycle 100 times. And I thought, well, yep. Well,
I love this.
And my kids helped me. And within about 3 days, I had myself a really nice street bike. And it was the first time I had rode a bike in probably 25 years. And I had to take it home from Salt Lake. And it was a distance of about 40 miles. And it was dark. And I know I had angels watching me. But on that bike, and I drove it to work and back. I drove it a lot of places. And Jack actually learned to drive it, and we would take dates at the end of the period when he was healthy. Anyway, but you have to concentrate completely when you're rusty. at learning again to ride a motorcycle, especially on the street. And so it was my time away from the addiction. It was my time to just let my mind rest. And that's why I suggest to spouses, take time for yourself, do your dailies, but find a hobby, something you're passionate about, something that brings you joy. And it helps because, if we want to look at it technically, it allows the brain to rest and it allows the body to relax. It was also on that motorcycle where I learned to surrender. So even though I was very proficient on it, I'm a little person, and it was a decent sized bike, and driving in the dark was scary for me. And what I learned is that if I tensed up, I was in a lot more danger. It was during some heavy construction times, and one time I was relaxed and I hit the base of a cone, one of those orange barrels.
Oh, yeah.
They have a plastic base that's about 6 inches. It's completely black, so I never saw it, but I was at ease. So I went right over it. And what I derived from that is when you let go, when you quit clenching the pain, when you quit clenching the reality that you're not happy with, you let go and life becomes better. You let God take care of the things you can't take care of, like bases in the middle of the road, and you come out okay.
Roxy, I want to complete the trifecta now. I asked you first, what did your husband do to create safety for you? James piggybacked on that. Asked you what you did. I'm curious because your book is not just for spouses, but for those who support spouses.
Uh-huh.
What can, and I'd love it if you could speak to kind of, the communities of people who have spouses struggling in addiction. What can someone who's supporting a person who has a spouse in addiction do to create safety for the person they're supporting? Because everybody needs community, like you said earlier.
Uh-huh. The biggest thing that I would say is learn. So I'll tell you a story. So I was an author by trade long before I wrote this book. And so I knew to have beta readers. And one of the very first people, I thought I was giving it to a young woman. And it was still a little rough, but I knew she was struggling. And I handed it to her mother. And she came back a couple of weeks later and said, "Thank you so much." She said, "I now understand what my daughter is going through." So that's why I say dig in and learn. Whether it's from me or you attend classes or you listen to podcasts like this, find out what your spouse is dealing with. Find out how betrayal trauma feels to them. Find out what deep hidden fears were erupted because of the betrayal that might have nothing to do with you as a support person or even as the addicted spouse, but were brought up by this experience. What insecurities. And it doesn't mean you have to pander to those things. It just means that you're going to be able to see them and sit with them. You're not going to try and fix them. You're going to hear them. And you're going to be able to not give sympathy, because we don't want sympathy, but to give empathy, to say, even if it's nothing you can relate to, you can say, I've hurt before. One of the first lines in the book is, when I first went to meetings, I wasn't ever going to tell this story. But there were women in those meetings who knew their stories were sacred, and they told them, and they expected the listeners to keep them sacred. And it was through those noble persons that I learned that my story was sacred, and to expect others to hold it sacred as well. And what I'm saying is, if you become a safe person who can sit with that spouse, you'll hear her story because she knows you're safe to share her sacred story. And these spouses need to talk. It's not that they're just wanting to vent. Through talking, our brains make sense of what we've gone through. It creates a beginning and a middle and an ending. And so it allows the parts of the brain to talk to each other and put the memories into their proper context. Mm-hmm. And so you might just be listening, but you're allowing that spouse time and space to heal.
And that's important because often the betrayed spouse, they were living under a false reality of what what you said. They essentially, you said they need time and they have the right to know their story.
Right.
And when what you called when the big bomb gets dropped, all of a sudden your whole story gets completely disoriented, right?
Yeah, I thought my life was a fake.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so being able to talk through that helps somebody understand now their story, their real story, and deconstruct the false story that they had.
Yes.
Right.
My mom, when she found out about my dad's sexual addiction right before their 25th wedding anniversary, and it crushed her. But I remember her saying that when she was able to go back through her life and she had the time and space to do so, she started to see moments where she recognized the pain that she had that she was dealing with in moments was because of the presence of the addiction in the relationship. And she suddenly had the ability to process in a way she never could before because she had the language and she had the story.
Yes.
So how did you see that in your recovery?
I started understanding what human connection was and why I had not felt it. And I started seeking it within our marriage and seeking it with other people. And that opens up a whole new world when you suddenly realize why you could be with your family and still feel lonely.
Yeah. So what's it like to go through that for the first time after how many years did you say? Was it 24 years?
Yeah.
After 24 years, what's it like to go through that for the first time with a spouse?
Well, I'm going to say from the time you heard the story,
yes,
because you grew up in a home of an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to guess it didn't happen there either.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, there was healing there too. There's, I think that's the beauty is I've seen a lot of healing. There is always hope for healing. But you ask how that feels. I can't remember a specific time when it just flipped. We had to practice and practice and practice. And so it was gradually. I remember distinctly feeling, hey, we got through that. We had that really tough conversation. So it was incremental steps. And then one day you realize you're seen. Does that make any sense?
It's a process.
Yes, it is. And it's an up and down process. Like I said, those 3 years had several serious relapses. And I was prone to say, see, this will never work. But what I realized is we never started from ground zero. We always had what we had learned before. Yep. to start back again. It's just whether we both committed to start back again.
Yeah, relapse doesn't mean you fell all the way back down the mountain and all the way to the trailhead.
Right. And you know, it was actually my father who verbally said that.
Yeah.
You know, in an odd way, and I say in an odd way, in the odd way that God works, my father, who was an alcoholic in my growing up years, became my confidant. And the reason why is because I could hate Jack and love Jack all at the same time, and I didn't have to explain that to him. And he understood from himself what addiction could do to you, and the poor choices you could make from it, and the hurt that it could cause. You know, one time we were on the phone. It was the only time in my entire life that my father called me regularly. And he's never been a man of a lot of words, but he would listen, and I would usually have some wisdom when I hung up. He was the one who taught my mother what a boundary was, because I had a boundary that Jack would have to leave if there was another relapse, and that was, my mother was like, "Oh, you can't do that." And it was my dad that took the time to learn from me that he kept boundaries too. We just had different language. But one day I was on the phone to him, and I said, you know, I don't get this. One day Jack is my loving husband, and the next day he's Satan, and I don't know who he is. And my dad said, well, he's the same person. And he says, a long time ago, my stake president told me, and it took me years to figure out he was talking about that the stake president told him as he was working through his own repentance and recovery. His stake president said, in this calling, I get to work with some of the very best people and some of the very worst people. And most of the time, they're the very same people. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
And through stuff like that, I learned to look at myself and realize I wasn't perfect. So how could I expect Jack to be? And when I turned that corner, then I started appreciating his work toward recovery. And somewhere in that process, it was before. I will always remember this. We had gone out to dinner, and he looked at me, and it was with all the love in his eyes, and he said, "You're moving on, aren't you?" And he didn't mean that I was moving out, or I was. He meant that I was becoming happy, and that I was finding healing.
Yeah.
And I put my hand on his, and I said, yes, and I would love you to join me. And I think that was a pivotal point.
That's so good.
Roxy, you had mentioned that your husband passed away, and you eventually remarried. I wanted to give you time to talk about this because this is a really important part of your story, and we're running out of time. But so can you tell us about, the time basically leading up to now, your second recovery story with your second husband and what that was like for you? I think I'm particularly interested to understand, what did you learn the second time around with your husband, who also struggled with an addiction, that you didn't understand the first time?
Well, I include this part of my story because it shows agency. And the story of Jack and I shows agency too, but it has this wonderful little ending. Well, agency means, especially in a marriage, that two people make maybe even hundreds of decisions every single day that contribute to whether their marriage thrives or it ends. And so about 4 years after Jack passed away, I married another man, and I knew that he had struggled with alcohol, and I was very familiar with that. But his sincerity to live a clean life appeared to be very genuine and sincere. But a month into our marriage, some of his stepchildren did something that pushed every button he had. And I find that God does that. He likes to push our buttons to give us chances to grow. And
well said.
Sometimes I say I hate the model, but
it's a tough model.
It is a tough model, and I'm sure I'll be talked to in the afterlife about saying that. But anyway, I knew what this looked like, and I went and saw the therapist that had guided me through recovery. I never quit living the principles of recovery, but I doubled down and I said, look, I understand this. I'll stand by you. We'll do this. But he just got angry. He didn't want to. And he didn't honor boundaries, and the marriage ended. And, it was a terrible, terrible heartbreak to me. During the beginning phases of it disintegrating, I had received a blessing, and some of the words caught my attention. It said, you will see a new application of agency. And I that puzzled me. And because I assumed that he would want to heal. And what I learned is it was my agency. And I had to learn even better this time how to take care of myself. I had to learn that loving detachment sometimes means, I hope you heal at some other time. I hope the very best for you. And I've come to the point where, most days I can say that about this man. I hope he does. But he wasn't willing to, and it breaks my heart. But I learned that it's okay to work recovery and be self-wise and not disintegrate your life because someone else is continuing to disintegrate theirs.
That's really beautiful.
It's really sad, too. It's a hard lesson.
Yeah. Well, I have appreciated your vulnerability, and I'm excited for this to be published so I can go back and listen to it, because I will treasure this. I appreciate all the insights that you shared. I think my favorite, though, is what you just really shared at the very end, which is that after everything that we do, we have to honor choice.
Yeah, we do. And the other part of that is that we get to look shame right in the face and say, you're not going to destroy me because my story is okay, because I'm walking this story with God, and He'll make everything work out at some point.
Do you have anything to share about your story, insights you learned, things you felt things that you understand now that you didn't get to share before we close up that you feel like would be really helpful to tie up the loose ends and kind of leave with a bang?
You know, maybe it's not a bang, but it's an example that really helped me. And it might help some spouse who is out there suffering and struggling with feelings of self-doubt and self-incrimination and so forth. It was something that was passed around meetings where to think of your life as experiences, and you're on this conveyor belt up above. Well, you're up above, and all the experiences of your life are down below, and they're just experiences. You're a divine being who's learning. And that really helped me because that took away the self-judgment. That took away all of the condemnation that I gave myself or that other people had for me, because I knew I was learning. And I would encourage any spouse that struggles with those things to just sit down one day and say, what have you learned? And I bet they have a whole list. And maybe if they can just look at their life as experiences that the Lord is walking with them through for them to learn and become all they can, then maybe it will help them have peace.
Roxy, if people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Well, my book has a website. It's the full title of the book, Forgotten in the Battle with Sexual Addiction, The Journey of a Spouse.com. And it has a contact feature, or my email is roxyj16@gmail.com. I'm pretty open. I love to help people who are going through this.
Thank you.
Guys, that was Roxanna Johnson, the author of Forgotten in the Battle of Sexual Addiction, The Journey of a Spouse. It offers tips for spouses and those who support them. Thank you for watching Unashamed Unafraid. If you have a story that you want to share, we would love to hear it. Reach out to us, sam@unashamedunafraid.com or contact@unashamedunafraid.com. We want to get your stories out there, and we want to help people heal. Thank you for listening. Find us on social media @UnashamedUnafraid. You can get access to our bonus content and become an outsider on unashamedunafraid.com. And until next time, continue to live unashamed.